If you build it correctly, the Contagion U1 is one of, if not the strongest Tier 12 Conquerors. Hey everyone, Derpy here, and welcome back to another video. As I get started, I do want to mention that this is a re-upload with a different build of a Contagion video. If you saw one before, this one is a little bit different. There are some hidden stats which I'm just a little bit annoyed about. You can thank Templar and Alpha for the corrections on that. But this is not a top secret alliance build, this is one that I found that works the best. I do also want to mention that if you want to jump to a specific point in the video, you can do so using the YouTube chapters feature, so you can find what is most helpful to you. I will also share that, as like with all my videos, I have the Google Doc for all my builds linked in the description. You can open this up, take the hash codes, and paste them into your shipyard through the share feature, and get access to all my builds here. I'm also working on turrets and some other stuff like that as well. But let's go ahead and get into the build. So the first thing I will share with the build, and by the way, there are some replays running in the background. You can feel free to watch those through a second time to get a better access to better understanding of what this hull is doing. This is a refit, so my ship is already at U1 and have some stuff equipped, so the build time is not going to be accurate here. It's about 3.5 days for the hull and another 3 or 4 days for the weapons, specials, and armors. For the main weapon, there's really just one choice, that is the Pestilence UAV. Note that the chain count by default here is 1. I'll discuss chain count a little bit more when I show you an Excel spreadsheet for the heavy weapons. But that's really your only option for the weapons. It's the one that came with the ship, and there's no limited regular weapon or anything like that, so that's what you want to equip. In terms of the first 3 or 4 specials, there are some pretty standard options. The first one is your engine. You're going to want to use your corrosive engine because that really is just the best one. It gives you an extra 10% damage, which is not the best, but if you don't have this, just use one of the onslaught engines or Conqueror engines and you should do pretty well. I actually need to get this. I hope it is in the raid. Throw on the engine there, and that will really be your best option until a tier 12 engine comes out, if one does. Special slot number 2 is going to be a few damage specials. We're going to want to use Invasion Scanner 3. This is a pretty popular one and increases your building damage as well as your corrosive damage, which is going to, of course, be important for the UAVs. The next one you're going to want to use is one of 2 batteries. Your first option is Conquest Battery 2, which gives you plus 110%, which is okay. It also does give you some combat speed and turn speed. If you find your ships to be too slow, you can use that one. The one I'm going to show is the one for maximum damage, and this, when you factor it all out, gives you plus 118.75% corrosive damage, and building corrosive damage, I should say here, and it also does apply versus ships too, which is pretty nice. So I like this one more. It does a little bit less combat speed, but has more damage, so I like this one. Speaking of corrosive damage, another great corrosive damage special is going to be your Compressed Corrosion Canisters 2. It's essentially a better version of the narrow firing aperture. Gives you corrosive damage, which is really nice. You can ignore the other stats on there. Now, before we jump into the last 2 special slots, I want to pivot back and talk about the heavy weapon and how chain count works on the whole. So you may notice that there is currently no chain count added on the special, or in terms of the I should say on the hull itself right here, chain count does not apply. But if I were to add that by using one of the UAV specials, such as, let's say, the chain count one that came out with the ship, which is the UAV targeting circuitry, which, by the way, you should not be using, chain count will show up as 2 on the ship, which is going to override whatever is on the weapons, which shows up as a 1 for the Pestilence UAV. Kixeye actually did give us a different UAV special, which is the UAV Targeting Circuitry Mark II, which is basically the exact same as the first one, but it doesn't have any chain count. The reason they did this is because if you use this special, and you also use the limited weapon, which is the Festering UAV, the Festering UAV has a chain count of 5, which means it's going to chain to 5 different targets. That will be true unless you do something like equip this UAV Targeting Circuitry Mark I to your ship, in which count the attack will have a chain count of 2 right here, which is going to override the 5 on your UAV, making it much, much worse. UAVs are just a little bit complicated that way. But I don't think you should be using the Festering UAV, and I do think you should be using the Targeting Circuitry Mark II. To explain, let's go ahead and open up an Excel spreadsheet and a few of the different weapons and damage types and stuff like that. Here I have the 3 heavy weapons, Touch of Death, Festering, and the Plague Bearer UAV, which is the one that you don't need to have U1 for. You need U1 for the Touch of Death and the Festering. So the range is higher for the Plague Bearer, which I suppose is nice. The way UAV works is that there is a specific number of shots per swarm. So for example, for the Festering UAV, it shoots at 0 seconds, 0.8, 1.6, 2.4, and then enough to get up to 4 shots total, because the UAV weapon reload, which is different than the UAV reload, it's pretty complicated, allows it to do so. But these are the number of shots they fire per swarm, and based on the damage that each of them do and the chain count of them, you get up to 40 million damage for the Touch of Death or the Festering, and only 18 million damage for the Plague Bearer. So you can double your damage by using the correct UAV. Now you may be wondering why have a chain count of 1 under Touch of Death. You should think that, oh, if I use the UAV targeting circuitry Mark 1 as well as the UAV chain special, I can get this up to 3 and do 120 million damage. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite that easily because Kixeye, for some reason, has some sort of hidden stat in the game where the Touch of Death UAV only chains on death, just like the Horror UAV. I'm pretty annoyed that this stat isn't publicly available anywhere on Discord, whatever they call forums now, and especially not in the game. I 100% think this needs to be added to the weapon in-game. Otherwise, it's kind of stupid, but hey, that's Kixeye for you. Feel free to file a support ticket asking why that stat is not on there. Now, what this means is that it's roughly equal damage between Touch of Death and Festering UAV, but for Festering to actually work, it needs to chain to 5 different targets, which isn't always going to happen, and the Touch of Death gets the extra advantage is that on death of a target, it will chain however many times your hull has, which actually for my build is going to be 0. But this 40 million damage just to 1 target is better than I think 8 million damage split up across 5 targets. So my answer is to use the Touch of Death UAV. Let's go ahead and jump back to the game. So I'm going to use the Touch of Death UAV, and you can see here that the UAV swarm duration is 0.4 and the reload is 1, so it's only actually going to fire once per swarm, which is fine, and that's what I was mentioning earlier. And even if you use chain count, it's not going to work with this. Don't ask me why that doesn't occur. This means that we definitely want to use the Mark II UAV targeting circuitry because it's not going to mess anything up. I suppose we could actually take this and we could change it to, let's say, the targeting circuitry Mark I, and that would allow you to actually increase your chain count on your regular weapons. So right here you can see that your regular weapons have a chain count of 1, but because the whole has a chain count of 2, this stat right here, and wherever the chain count is, should override if you use the correct special. If you use the Mark I, it's going to override and have a chain count of 2 and have these weapons chained twice, but it's not going to work with the Touch of Death UAV, which is kind of disappointing. So chain count of 2 right here, as far as I know, unless there's something else weird going on in the game, in which case I will leave a comment on this video somehow, should allow all your UAVs to chain twice except for the heavy weapon on death. Now, because your heavy weapon doesn't really change and it's going to be a highest or a high form of damage, I'm going to recommend that you don't use special slot 6 for helping this thing chain on death. Instead, I just want you to increase the corrosive damage, which you can do through, if you really want to, the corrosive scope or force. I would use the force rather than the scope, although I think the regular upgrade, corrosive upgrade, is the way to go on this one. So there is my conclusion in terms of the specials. With the armors, you can notice that the hull has some defense stats, and this is at U1, so it has extra penetrative and corrosive and ballistic defense, which is pretty nice. If you take a look at the defense, you'll notice that the corrosive is the lowest one at only 10%. Ballistic is also 10%, but there's only pit bulls, and those are pretty weak, so it doesn't really matter to me, and you could always tank that with a different ship like the Helmaz. Instead, I'm going to go here and throw in some limited armors. You also notice that these invader plates have no equip cap higher than the number of armors you have on here. It used to be you could only pick one of each. If I had to pick one of each, I would go corrosive and missile. But since I can put 2 on here, I'm going to put 2 corrosive ones and throw the defense stat up to plus 27%, which will be better against the new scatter turret. So there is my build that I have right here. I will just again emphasize that the chain count on the Hold right here 2 will override the weapon, and the regular UAVs are going to chain twice, whereas your heavy weapon is only going to chain twice on death, otherwise it's only going to chain 1 time, but that shouldn't matter since it has such a high damage count. I hope you're able to enjoy this video, and again, sorry about having to post it twice, but I want to go ahead and say thank you to those whose names appear on the end screen now. I'm actually going to update this and get all the new people who have joined added on here, so you're going to see at least one more name added on here for the next video. With that said, and until next time, this is going to be Derpy, signing out, helping you be a better pilot.